All right, so we're going to get on with our program, and Dan Aroma is here. He's the Northeast Regional Chapter Director for the Act for America, and he's just done a great job with this whole program, and I think you're going to be very interested in what he has to say. So Dan, come on up and give us your best shot here. Let's have a round of applause for Dan and from Act for America.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Portage County Tea Party, for having me. As Tom mentioned, I've been working for the last about a year and a half, ever since I joined Act for America, and going around Northeast Ohio. Well, it started in Northeast Ohio, and now it's gone around the state. I was at the Ohio Liberty Coalition back at the end of July and gave a presentation down there, and as a result of that, I've been invited to 8 different cities around the state, so they're going to see what you're going to see tonight, which is something very frightening. My name is Dan Hromada. It's got no relation to the Hromada Inn. Act for America is the name of the organization. It's a national organization. One of the reasons I'm here to talk to you tonight is we have a state law that we're trying to get passed. It got introduced in April. It's called American Laws for American Courts. It's Ohio House Bill 513. It's in Arizona, Kansas, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Louisiana, Florida, North Carolina, Washington State, and it's on the ballot for the voters as a referendum in Alabama in November. ALAC is what we call it, Ohio House Bill 513. It's sponsored by State Rep Matt Lynch out of Bainbridge. Co-sponsors John Adams, John Becker, Terry Boos, Andrew Brenner, Ron Hood, Ron Mogg, Wes Rutherford, and Andy Thompson. This is a very small, the beginning of the bill reads like this: a bill to enact Section 2701 of the Ohio Revised Code to prohibit courts, administrative agencies, and arbitrators from applying foreign law to the detriment of constitutional rights of Ohio residents under U.S. and Ohio constitutions. And people say, well, why do we need this? Well, who knows where we're going with this immigration nonsense, for one. But secondly, we've had Sharia law applied or considered 148 times at the appellate level, and 31 of those cases have been upheld. That is 31 cases, way too many. Act for America is a national organization that works with state legislators, or works with our grassroots organizations to work with state legislators to get this law passed, because we're trying to stop what's going on in Europe, what's going on in the UK especially. They are operating with 85 Sharia courts operating simultaneously, so like a parallel legal system because of all the Muslim migration. So Act for America is the nation's largest grassroots national security movement. Of 800, where our purpose and mission is combat radical Islam and the spread of Sharia law. And I should have added this, but one of our agendas is to expose a sinister agenda of an organization called the Muslim Brotherhood. And that's one reason, or the main reason why I'm here tonight. This bill has opened the doors for me to allow to talk to people about what's really going on with the Muslim Brotherhood. We have 875 chapters, 289,000 members worldwide. And just like your sign said at the door, if you're getting the emails from Brigitte's organization at the national organization, you are a member. This is Brigitte Gabriel. You've seen her on Fox News. She's on with Hannity quite a bit, and she has been trying to warn the country about radical Islam and telling everybody that it's not just over there, it's over here. It's one of my heroes, Alan West. Met him last year when my partner, who was in the audience right in front of us, Bev Goldstein, and I were at the 5th annual conference for Act for America. Alan West was one of the keynote speakers, and he is very passionate on this subject as well. He knows truly what we're up against. He served on the battlefield, he served in Congress, and he knows all the games that are being played up in D.C. and the danger we're in. Okay, the war on terror. We have been told for years that we were only dealing with Al-Qaeda. And now, all of a sudden, we got bin Laden, so Al-Qaeda's on the run. Then they're a JV team. I mean, the story changes constantly. And now we're dealing with ISIS. ISIS would be the varsity if Al-Qaeda is the JV. And that's in the kinetic war on terror. That's the physical aspect of it. But there's so much more. The Muslim Brotherhood, like I said, is in this country, and they're performing something known as stealth or civilization jihad. They've been at this for a good 20 years, and it's really getting a lot of legs to it. We're also up against an organization known as the OIC, or the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. These are all the Muslim countries, 56 Muslim countries in the Palestinian territories. So even though they're fighting with each other all the time, Shia versus Sunni, they still have this organization, and they meet and they represent the largest voting bloc in the UN, and that represents trouble for us. And then, of course, like every other issue that we're concerned with, political correctness is what we're up against. I'm going to show you a 4-minute trailer right now of a film that I've been showing for the last year called Jihad in America, The Grand Deception. This was done by Steve Emerson from the Investigative Project on Terrorism. He's one of the leading experts on terrorism in the country. We met him last year in D.C. I worked out a deal to get a bunch of copies, and I've given it to a lot of different leaders around the country or around the state, political leaders, Tea Party leaders, so that they would watch it, and that's opened the doors for me as well. So here's the 4-minute trailer, which will explain a little bit about the Muslim Brotherhood.
The Muslim Brotherhood is an international movement, the goal of which is to create an Islamic state universally, all over the world.
In my mind, the Muslim Brotherhood is the mother of all Islamic organization of the 20th century, including Al-Qaeda.
Democracy, the black people freedom. No, we don't want to democratize Islam. We want to Islamize democracy.
They believe that Western civilization is corrupt, is evil, is decadent, and they want to dismantle it.
Because if you remain on the side of injustice, the wrath of God will come. Please, all Americans, do you remember that Allah is watching everyone, God is watching everyone. If you continue doing injustice and tolerate injustice, the wrath of God will come.
برنامج الإخوان المسلمين، كل الإسلاميين من الإخوان المسلمين إلى بن لادن هو العودة إلى الخلافة، العودة إلى عصر الخلفاء الراشدين، العودة إلى تطبيق الشريعة، والعودة إلى الجهاد. 4 حاجات ضرورية.
The Muslim Brotherhood is like the Russian doll. It's one organization inside another, inside another, inside another, and it's endless. You never have a complete sense of it unless you have the totality of the dolls. They are very, very clever if you are privy to their master plan.
The Ikhwan, which is what the Brotherhood uses to describe themselves, must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house by their hands and the hands of the believers, so that it is eliminated and God's religion is made victorious over all other religions. That's pretty clear as to how they viewed their own objective. And they're talking about the United States here.
Our job is to change the Constitution of America.
فالفتح بالدعوة هذا ما نأمله إن شاء الله. سنفتح أوروبا وسنفتح أمريكا لا بالسيف ولكن بالدعوة.
There was a systematic plan to establish an Islamist beachhead in the United States with the eventual goal of watching the United States crumble from within and establishing Islamic rule in this country.
The West as we see today, instead of isolating the Muslim Brotherhood, actually engaging the Muslim Brotherhood as the organization that's moderate, and these are the Muslims we can talk to. The West is tremendously naive about the danger of these various Islamic organizations.
Okay, there it is, Jihad in America, The Grand Deception. You can get it on Amazon. granddeception.com. It's like $15 for a 70-minute version. They also have a 30-minute version, but you'd have to get that through me for like $10. I'd have to order that directly from Steve. In that film, it talks about in 2004, there was a Maryland couple stopped on the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, and they were filming the suspension cables. Alerts Maryland State Trooper pulled them over, ran a check on Mr. Albarrasi, the driver of the vehicle, and they discovered an arrest warrant for him. Arrested him, did a search of his home, and in the basement, actually the sub-basement, they found the archives of the Muslim Brotherhood in this country. Hundreds of documents. Those documents, one of which is called the Explanatory Memorandum, and that's the one that we'll refer to quite a bit when we're talking about this. It lists 29 Muslim Brotherhood front groups, organizations that are front groups for the Muslim Brotherhood in this country. Those documents were used as evidence in the largest terrorism financing trial in the history of the United States, and it's called the Holy Land Foundation trial. As a result of that, they put over 130 people away for funneling $12 million to Hamas, and then there was supposed to be a second part of the trial, and that's the part that we are so avidly working at Act for America and trying to get this exposed. Let people know. This could be technically another D.C. scandal. This trial has not been allowed to go forward. There are 302 unindicted co-conspirators, those 29 Muslim Brotherhood front groups, and then 273 individuals that are the government has the goods on these people, and they've squashed the trial. Congressman Louis Gohmert, who has been for years now trying to get these files released to Congress, has been going at it repeatedly with Eric Holder. Holder will not release these files to Congress. What a shock. If you'll recall, if you're watching the news, I should say Fox because they're the only one to cover anything, probably about a couple months ago, when they got into it, Holder and Gohmert got into it, and Holder said to Gohmert, "You don't want to go there?" Does anyone remember that? Well, they were talking about the contempt that Congress was putting him under, and they were talking about Fast and Furious. But what led up, the start of that conversation was Gohmert asking again for these files, and then Holder refusing to, and playing coy with him, refusing to give them. So just like everything else, they're refusing to acknowledge things. 300 and some people are waiting trial, basically, and we're hoping that that'll happen when when administration is changed. 29 Muslim Brotherhood front groups. 3 of the top ones are the Muslim Students Association. These are organizations. This is a group that's on every college campus, every major college campus. And we're talking Georgetown, Harvard, Stanford, Duke. They're also at the local schools: Kent State, Cleveland State, John Carroll, Baldwin Wallace, Oberlin, Case. When Condoleezza Rice gets shot down or gets canceled from speaking at Rutgers University on a graduation or a commencement speech, it's the Muslim Students Association putting the pressure on the administration to stop her from speaking. The Islamic Society of North America, otherwise known as ISNA, in that video, if you remember the guy talking about our job is to change the Constitution, that was the president, his name is Siddiqui, in 2006 at their annual convention of the Islamic Society of North America. He's talking to his folks in a big room full of people like this. A side note, their 51st annual conference is this coming weekend, and 2 keynote speakers are going to be there. Governor Rick Snyder from Michigan, a Republican, and Jimmy Carter. So, go figure. So this is something that's affected both parties. The Council on American Islamic Relations, or CARE, is also one of the main Muslim Brotherhood front groups. There it is, the Explanatory Memorandum, 1991. That is the logo of the Muslim Brotherhood. Muslim Brotherhood, by the way, spawned Al-Qaeda and spawned Hamas. This is what he was talking about in the film. The process of settlement is a civilization, jihadist process, what all the word means. The Ikhwan, that's what they call themselves. Must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house by their hands and the hands of the believers. So it's eliminated God's religion, meaning theirs, Islam, is made victorious over all other religions. Okay, so here's how they're doing it. Again, this plan was written in 1991, discovered in 2004. So they've been doing this for quite some time. Likely infiltrators in our government. Congressman Keith Ellison, the first congressman to swear in on a Quran. Congressman Andre Carson from Indiana, and our CIA director is a convert to Islam as well. Okay, so one of the things I've done, does anybody subscribe to The Blaze and watches For the Record? Well, I'm going to show you a video that they show. They have an episode every Wednesday throughout the school year, basically. There was nothing going on in the summer. And I would say that over the course of 2 years or 2 seasons, they've had probably 2/3 of every episode has to do with the Islamic problem in our country. And so one of the main ways that the Muslim Brothers are influencing our government is something called the Purge. So Glenn actually did a video on this, a documentary on it. I'm going to show it to you now. It's 24 minutes long. But before I do, I'm just going to jump ahead real quick. These are the guys, 6 key advisors in the Obama administration. And you're going to see them in the video and what they're doing. 2 guys, Mohammed Ali Biari, the second guy on the left, was a delegate for John McCain. He's a Republican from Texas. And Imam Muhammad Majid, the second guy on the right, is the president of ISNA currently.
Washington is broken. They can't stand the truth, and apparently the news media can't stand the truth. Media that affirms their own point of view.
I can't believe anything that they say. I just really can't.
I think that we need a different point of view other than the Republican and the Democratic Party.
Welcome to For the Record. I'm Lori Dew. In September 2012, the Blaze TV released a documentary called The Project. That film revealed how groups associated with the Muslim Brotherhood have infiltrated the highest levels of our government. Today, the Obama administration and many high-ranking Republicans openly work with the Brotherhood, while other nations are trying to destroy it. In December 2013, the Egyptian government officially classified the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist group. And in March 2014, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain withdrew their ambassadors from Qatar over its support for the Muslim Brotherhood. So what is it that the United States government doesn't understand that much of the rest of the world has discovered? Tonight, you will see how the Muslim Brotherhood is winning the war on information in America, as For the Record presents The Purge.
I still lecture every week for special forces, for federal law enforcement, for U.S. military and members of the intelligence community, and I'm very concerned.
Dr. Sebastian Gorka is a counterterrorism expert. He serves as an instructor at several national war colleges, training soldiers and law enforcement officials.
I'm very concerned that more Americans are up in arms, that we are fundamentally undermining the ability of our brave policemen and soldiers to do their job.
Whenever I gave those briefings, whether it was the behavioral analysis unit at the FBI, the SAMS course at Fort Leavenworth, whether it was the U.S. Army, a war college, I could win 90% of them over because I was briefing facts.
Stephen Coughlin is a former intelligence officer who served in the Pentagon as an advisor on Islamic doctrine to the Joint Chiefs of Staff from 2001 to 2008.
And there was about a 3 or 4 year period where I would have colonels come up to me, former regimental or brigade commanders, Marines, and they would be mad. And I thought they would be mad at me for something I said. And it was something I said. And I said, "What's wrong?" They said, it would be like that. It would be like that. I said, if I'd have known that when I was there, I'd still have troops alive.
In 2006, Coughlin began to notice a disturbing trend in the language being used to identify America's enemies. During the Bush administration, government agencies began to directly disassociate religious ideology from terrorism. Then, under the Obama administration, that policy broadened as the War on Terror was changed to Countering Violent Extremism, or CVE.
when the CVE came out with their, I think it was called their guidelines, what happened is they said Al-Qaeda is their greatest threat, and we have to go after their ideology. But in the same document, they said we couldn't go after anything having to do with religious belief. Even if Al-Qaeda is wrong about everything they say about Islam, it's still based on Islam. And if you do not go after the doctrinal basis of Al-Qaeda, Islamic law, as they understand it, then you cannot understand Al-Qaeda.
Basically, in order to try to avoid hurting radical Islamist feelings, we have engaged in callous, reckless disregard for the welfare of the American citizen.
Congressman Louis Gohmert of Texas sits on the House Judiciary Committee, where he serves as the vice chairman of the Subcommittee on Crime, Terrorism, and Homeland Security.
And we cannot be foolish about the way we go about protecting America.
Gohmert has made several attempts to convince Congress that political correctness is cleansing the nation's terrorism lexicon.
And the 9/11 Commission report used words like enemy 39 times, jihad 126 times, Muslim 145 times, because those who wanted to destroy us and tried used that term about themselves.
The 9/11 Commission report was released in 2004. 5 years later, the FBI's Counterterrorism Lexicon Guide contained absolutely no references to terms like Islam, Muslim, and jihad. But it does mention violent extremism 29 times in 11 pages.
How on earth do you understand a suicide bomber who thinks he's going to go to heaven and get 72 virgins if you're not allowed to talk about the religious justification for his violence and the ideology of jihad? There's no way you can understand the enemy.
But for distinguished military and law enforcement trainers like Gorka and Coughlin, their frustrations were just starting to mount.
Wired magazine, a man named Ackerman picked up the charge. For that whole rest of the year, everywhere I went, there was a Wired story following it.
Beginning in July 2011, Wired magazine published a series of articles that intensified the debate. On one side, there was political correctness, and on the other was effective law enforcement training. The articles were written by Spencer Ackerman, a man known for his ties to the Journal List, a private online forum used by liberal members of the media to promote a left-leaning narrative.
It's very deeply upsetting to counterterrorism experts inside the FBI. They're very concerned about two related issues, which are counterterrorism and civil rights. And those two go hand in hand because, as you remember, the great Jimmy McNulty said on The Wire, a cop isn't anything without his sources of information.
And that's the entire initiative with the Islamophobia campaign, which is to stop all discussion about Islam by anybody not authorized to speak on its behalf.
On October 19th, 2011, then Deputy National Security Advisor John Brennan received a letter at the White House signed by more than 50 Muslim American groups demanding action on the allegedly offensive training materials. Several of the groups who signed the letter, including the Council on American Islamic Relations, or CARE, and the Islamic Society of North America, or ISNA, were identified as Muslim Brotherhood affiliates just 3 years earlier during the Holy Land Foundation trial, the largest terrorism financing trial in U.S. history. CARE and ISNA were named as unindicted co-conspirators in the case.
Then I saw the letter that went to the White House from groups that are heavily represented by the Muslim Brotherhood, followed 10 days later by a response. And I kind of thought, wow. It was all based on an article from Ackerman. There were like 14 different or 15 different footnotes, and 13 of them were for one Ackerman article.
Very, very soon after we heard that something had changed at the highest levels of the U.S. government, I had to go back to an FBI facility to give my standard Al-Qaeda lecture. And then suddenly the FBI said, well, we need all your slide deck in advance, and we have to send it off somewhere to get it approved. And that's when I first heard about it. And then a week or two later, an anonymized email gets forwarded to me by the FBI, in which somebody somewhere took offense to various of my slides, called them inflammatory, and basically said either these are removed or you don't get to brief in front of federal law enforcement. And the really strange thing was, not only was I not allowed to appeal or discuss with this faceless person what the issues were, not even the FBI could identify who this individual was, who I later found out was somebody inside the civil rights section of DOJ at the highest levels.
We are reviewing all of the materials, all of our training materials, to ensure that that kind of misinformation is not being used, because that can really undermine the really substantial outreach efforts that we have made, and really have a negative impact on our ability to communicate effectively, as we have in the past, with this community. And I almost hesitate to say this community, because the reality is, when we say Muslim Americans, we're talking about Americans.
Of course, if you step back the clock a little bit, you'll recognize that the Muslim Brotherhood demanded a purge in that letter to Brennan that you had at the White House, that the White House conformed to. They said they're going to do that. And I remember every time I asked, you'd get those little conversations or sidebar discussions, and they all said, Steve, we'd like to do something about this, but it's coming from the White House. So I knew I was done.
While Coughlin and Gorka struggled to get answers, the Islamic groups calling for the purge had little trouble communicating their demands to senior leadership in the U.S. government. On February 8, 2012, then FBI Director Robert Mueller met with representatives from 6 Islamic organizations, including ISNA, to discuss the results of the purge. Eventually, lawmakers learned that the Bureau removed 876 documents and nearly 400 presentations from its training programs based on the recommendations from 5 so-called subject matter experts.
We would like to know who these subject matter experts are that are going through the FBI material and purging that of reference to jihad and Islam and these type of things.
When lawmakers demanded more information on the purging of training materials, officials at the FBI and the Department of Defense quickly classified much of the information, including the identities of the subject matter experts.
There was no reason to classify the names of the subject matter experts who went through and purged the material. I think those things were classified more out of a concern, out of being embarrassed by who they were, rather than out of protecting the American public. This is all about political correctness.
So you're in a situation where you have our government classifying people who are playing a role in our understanding of the nature of the enemy in the war on terror against the American people. It's classified from our understanding. And I think that's because they know that these people can't stand up to scrutiny.
On March 23, 2012, a senior FBI official met with staff members from the House Judiciary Committee to address their concerns regarding the purge. For the Record has obtained a transcript of that meeting, and at one point, a congressional staff member openly questioned the government's track record in selecting Islamic advisors. The individual asked the FBI agent, quote, "How do we know these subject matter experts are good guys?" The FBI official responded, "I guess ultimately, I don't."
The parallel I always give is, imagine if during World War II it would have been illegal to use the word Nazi in U.S. government. Imagine during the civil rights campaigns during the 40s and 50s, when the FBI was trying to hunt down and close down the Ku Klux Klan and those people that were lynching black-skinned Americans. Imagine if anybody in U.S. government has said, you are not allowed to call these individuals bigots, racists, or white supremacists. That individual would have been excoriated, would have been kicked out of office before he could have blinked. It is so unethical, so un-American that, of course, they have to protect themselves somehow through the cloak of anonymity.
Welcome back. In 2011 and 2012, the counterterrorism materials used to train federal law enforcement and the military were dramatically altered. Muslim American groups, several of which are inextricably linked to the Muslim Brotherhood, demanded a purge of documents they called offensive. But until last year, most of the content deemed offensive was concealed from the American people. Several groups have sued the government under the Freedom of Information Act to find out exactly what was removed. What they found said a lot about America's vulnerability and the cost of political correctness.
There's a group of terrorist front groups here in the United States that are treated by some in the media as legitimate civil rights organizations on behalf of Muslims or Islamists, when in fact they're nothing but fronts for foreign terrorist organizations.
Tom Fitton is the president of Judicial Watch, a group that has used the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA, to expose how the purge has severely restricted law enforcement and the Defense Department's understanding of the nation's enemies.
It began in the Bush administration, frankly, and it grew worse under the Obama administration, and now we can't use the word jihadist or Islamist or talk about the religious roots of al-Qaeda terrorism and Islamic terrorism in our national intelligence establishment.
In June 2013, Judicial Watch released hundreds of pages of FBI documents obtained through a FOIA lawsuit. For the first time, training materials that were deemed offensive by the Bureau's subject matter experts were released. The documents clearly show instances where the subject matter experts make vague claims when identifying materials to be removed, such as the overall tenor of certain presentations is problematic or too informal in the current political context. Judicial Watch also found that the FBI's subject matter experts rejected statements of fact, such as the Muslim Brotherhood's ties to terrorism or al-Qaeda's connection to past attacks.
Well, it would be as if we were in a Cold War with the Soviet Union and telling the FBI and the military not to talk about communism or understand what communism is about or read the writings of Marx. It's just insanity. We're letting the foxes run the henhouse.
I mean, think about what's being purged here. A lot of what's being purged is what in the 1990s we called evidence.
Andrew McCarthy is a former federal prosecutor. In 1995, McCarthy led the successful prosecution against 12 individuals, including Sheikh Omar Abdel Rahman, known as the Blind Sheikh, for the 1993 World Trade Center bombing and other planned attacks against New York City landmarks.
In order to get convictions in the terrorism cases in the 1990s, we needed to prove to the jury rationally why these people committed the atrocities they were accused of. So we had to expose them to what the ideology was and show them that the Blind Sheikh was one of the chief exponents of it, and that everything that was done in terms of their conversations and their activities was all laced with the tenets of this ideology. We're now taking that information that we use to convince juries to convict people of terrorism and telling the people that are supposed to be protecting the United States that they don't need to be concerned about that. You can't even wrap your brain around how crazy that is.
I can tell you that a relatively senior FBI agent told me that they were surveilling a terrorist suspect, an al-Qaeda suspect in the United States, and they had audio-visual surveillance on him, and they could work out that the vector of his movement would take him imminently into a mosque. And he told me that he had to make a split-second decision, because if he told his superiors where that suspect is going, the current conditions would have required him, his manager would have told him, close off the video and audio surveillance because that person's going into a mosque. This is a terrorist suspect. So you're absolutely allowing political requirements to block national security operations. That's the enormity of what we're talking about.
This is ground zero at the Boston bombing. Okay? This is ground zero at the Boston bombing. The Russians gave really good information. that because it didn't meet the ideological screen that the FBI enforces on its own people, they couldn't get their hands around it.
Despite criticism that the FBI missed some warning signs, Mueller said neither incident was preventable. A 2011 Russian warning about bombing suspect Tamerlan Tsarnaev turned up no terrorist connection.
But you're satisfied that the FBI in the Boston case, before the event, did a thorough job?
Yes. A 2013 For the Record investigation found that since 2009, the FBI also had evidence detailing radicalization at the Tsarnaev Brothers Mosque, the Islamic Society of Boston, which was founded by convicted terrorist Abdul Rahman Alamoudi.
The FBI never canvassed Boston mosques until 4 days after the April 15th attacks. If the Russians tell you that someone has been radicalized and you go check and see the mosques that they went to, then you get the articles of incorporation, as I have, for the group that created the Boston mosque where these Tsarnaevs attended, and you find out the name Alamoudi. Were you aware that those mosques were started by Alamoudi?
I've answered the question, sir.
You didn't answer the question. Were you aware they were started by Alamoudi? You were not. Okay.
So the director of the FBI was surprised, obviously, when I said, "Did you even know who started the Boston mosque?" It was Alamoudi, the guy that's doing 23 years for supporting terrorism. And that's one of the reasons we keep trying to have briefings for other members of Congress, make sure they understand how significant the threat is. I am not somebody that ever looks forward to saying, "I told you so." I don't want to ever have to say that. And I'm hoping that enough people will wake up. They didn't before Boston. Boston was preventable.
I wrote a book about my experience in the Blind Sheikh investigation a few years back called Willful Blindness. Back then, we basically closed our eyes to what was obvious. That was reckless. It endangered people to a degree that was irresponsible for a government. But it's almost child's play compared to now, because now we're not just closing our eyes to what's apparent, we're actually going into our files and erasing the knowledge base that we need to protect the country.
The administration says Al-Qaeda is the only problem, and you're allowed to go and hit this Al-Qaeda outpost in this country. It's a very shallow understanding of U.S. national security. Instead of understanding why is there an Al-Qaeda post in that country, who are they connected to, what do they believe, and where are they going to attack next? No, we're not interested in that. The bosses will give you a GPS coordinate, go and give me the head of that Al-Qaeda leader. That's not how you win a war, because this is an ideological war, but you're banned from discussing the ideology.
Okay, so you got the general gist. These guys have influence policy. They're running influence operations. They've gotten the government to purge the documents, change the guidelines, and a little later, Bev is going to pass out a handout that you can look at the end of the presentation, and it's got those countering violent extremism guidelines that they came out with. There's a copy of that in there. Also an article from Judicial Watch explaining the purge. One of the things. Those are two of the biggest things, though, affecting the DHS and affecting the purge. 2010, the guidelines were changed. You'll read it right in there. It says it's okay to have people talking about Sharia. So they're laying the groundwork. They are now teaching the DHS and law enforcement to not use moderate Muslims, and their definition would be the ones who are against Sharia law as trainers. In 2012, the purge happened. Hundreds of FBI files, training manuals, and presentations were removed and purged within 6 weeks, by the way. That's how quickly they got to it. And they fired all the trainers that were, or a lot of the trainers that were working. And so a lot of those trainers have gravitated towards and working with Act for America, and that's how we're finding all these things out. Here's an example of political correctness in its worst. In the Fort Hood shooting, Major Nadal Hassan had business cards with the initials SOA on it. That stands for Soldier of Allah. He was shouting Allahu Akbar as he gunned down 31 people, killing 13 of them, and he was outraged by our refusal to accept the law of Sharia, or Allah, the Sharia, to be the supreme law of the land. The administration continues to classify this as workplace violence. Even to this day, now that he has been convicted and sentenced to death, they're still calling it workplace violence, won't call it a terrorist attack, so they're prohibiting medals and benefits to the survivors, or going out to the survivors. When this happened, I remember watching ABC Morning, Sunday Morning, or whatever the program was called, but George Stephanopoulos was the moderator. And this General George Casey was on then. And I remember hearing him say this, that as bad as the deaths of the 13 soldiers were, it would be an even greater tragedy if our diversity becomes a casualty. So that's the attitude we're dealing with. Okay, CARE and the IRS. Back just prior to the 2012 election, CARE got immediate tax or nonprofit status approval after years of not properly filing their tax records. And guess who approved this, by the way? It was your friend Lois Lerner. In the plan, it talks about getting a TV station. Now we have Al Jazeera English, who took over for Current TV with studios in New York, Detroit, and California. Al Jazeera is owned by the government of Qatar. The government of Qatar is the financial backing of the Muslim Brotherhood. Okay, mosques and Islamic centers. In the year 2000, we had 800 mosques or Islamic centers in the country. We are now approaching 2,300. And again, it's listed in the plan. That's their base of operations. We have training camps in the country. Prior to ISIS, the ones we knew about for sure was Jamaat al-Fukra, another organization that was exposed by the Christian Action Network. It was also exposed by the Clarion Project, along with Act for America, the Houston chapter down there. Where these training camps are allowed to operate in the country, they are running right up to the letter of the law. Our FBI knows about them. In fact, all the documentation comes from declassified information. These people are out there training, they have films on them, and they just haven't committed any crimes yet that we can prove. People that have been sentenced, put to prison, but not the training camps themselves, haven't been shut down. That has nothing to do with ISIS. Now here's the scary part. 25 according to the Christian Action Network, 35 according to the Jihad Watch. If any of you have seen Claire Lopez, up in the greater Cleveland area, she talks to different groups from time to time. Claire used to be with the CIA. She's a Cleveland lady, Cleveland gal. We've gotten to know her. She's good friends with Bev. And we had dinner with her last year in D.C., and when we were talking about this, she said it's more like 85 training camps, and the government knows all about them. So that's just Jamaat al-Fukra. Another way they're doing it, influence. They're in our schools. Grade schools. This happened down in Texas in a program called C-Scope, their version of Common Core. Students were dressing in burqas. People exposed this to Glenn Beck. He put it on the blaze. They got the state senate involved down there, and they stopped this temporarily. However, this is going on everywhere. I want to play this 4-minute video for Hannity.
And welcome back to Hannity. World history textbook in the Florida public school system is raising serious concerns over its alleged Islamic bias. Now, the textbook has been used in 9th grade advanced placement classes in Brevard County schools for the past 3 years. It is now under review by the school board. Let's take a look inside this book. Now, first, as you can see on the screen, the book has a major chapter on Islam titled Muslim Civilizations. By the way, keep in mind, it has 0 chapters on Christianity or Judaism. The chapter goes on to teach about the Prophet Muhammad and how he became God's messenger. Even describes jihad as a, quote, holy war to defend Islam. Here now with the book in hand and more details on the controversy, Fox News Radio's Todd Stearns.
This is it, Sean. 36 pages in this textbook dedicated to Islam and the Prophet Muhammad. Not one chapter about Christianity, not one positive mention about Jesus. They say that some people believe he may be the Savior, but they declare definitively that Muhammad is God's messenger. Public school.
You said they're defining jihad, interpreting as a holy war to defend Islam. Like they're the victims.
Exactly. As a matter of fact, I mean, through the entire chapter, Sean, I mean, Islam is defended. They talk about how wonderful Islam is to women. I mean, you think that they were having Victoria's Secret stores over there, I mean, by reading this.
The women who can't drive or go to school.
That's right. Or the women who are stoned, who've been brutally assaulted and murdered. None of that is mentioned here in this book.
Or the women under Sharia that need 4 male eyewitnesses to prove rape.
Look, it goes so far as to even redefine history and reconstruct history. They talk about the Crusades. Whenever the Christians do something, they call it a massacre. But whenever the Muslims do something, they call it an occupation.
Yeah, well, big difference. Why, if it's a world history book, and they're going to deal with the sensitive topic of religions, why not comparative religions?
It's a great question, and unfortunately, the publisher of this book is not giving us the answer to that question. I called Pearson publishers. They wouldn't talk to us. They gave us a prepared statement. They're defending this. They say it's fair and balanced. But look, school board members are telling me in Brevard County that it's not fair and balanced. They've had a chance to read this, and they have big problems with it. But this is bigger than just Brevard County. Sean, when I did my original story, we started getting emails from all over the country, parents saying they had similar issues, and we understand that a study's been done by the Citizens for National Security, and they tell me that at least 80 textbooks that are in use right now are filled with Muslim bias. This is happening all across the country.
Is it just bias, or is it also a whitewashed, politically correct version? For example, the definition of jihad is wrong.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, it's not only whitewashing history, it's also distorting what jihad and what other definitions like that really are. And the reason why is this. There is an organization called the Institute on Religious and Civic Values. They have an advisor. They were an academic advisor to this book. Now, you might say that seems like a fairly normal organization.
Innocuous.
They changed their name. They used to be known as the Council on Islamic Education.
Pretty amazing. Where's the ACLU? Where are liberals that don't want any religion or the mention of Jesus or prayer in schools?
Cue the crickets. Look, you put baby Jesus in the school play, the ACLU's filing a lawsuit. You have teachers saying grace, as they did it to one school in the Florida Panhandle. They're threatened with jail. But they haven't issued one statement about 36 pages of Islamic doctrine, Bible verses from the Quran in here. No Bible verses, but the Quran is in this public school textbook.
Do you think this outcry that started, do you think it'll end in this being removed?
That could be. Just a few moments ago, a school board member called me from Brevard County. She's introducing this to the entire board. She has grave concerns about what she read in here, and we could see this book revised, rewritten, or possibly removed from the school system.
This book did not get removed. They worked out some sort of a compromise and instituted some sort of a supplement. But this is a battle that's going on everywhere around the country. This Council on Islamic Education, these organizations that are getting to the publishers, these are groups affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood. Just make that. So they've gotten to the publishers as well. They're determining the Islamic education. So not only did we take God out of the schools in 1963, and we see what's happening to this country, now we're promoting Islam. Part of that handout that you're getting, there's a page in there, a homework assignment from a 7th grader for one of the grandmothers in our group who lives in Parma. This was handed out at their school, and it gives the 5 pillars of Islam. The student has to put the answers down. But then the words, the answer is given to the student for jihad. It's a struggle, don't you know, to please God, not Allah. And Sharia, the answer is given then. So if jihad is to struggle, then, that's what they're being taught. So, and that's indoctrination. So that's going on with the grade schools. Okay. Don't have a lot of time to get in this part, but we've found stuff with Common Core in downtown Washington. This building is going up right near the Department of Education. It's owned by the Qatar Foundation International. QFI.org is the website. You could go take a look at some of the stuff that they have planned for the kids. This is owned by the government of Qatar. Again, the financial backers of the Muslim Brotherhood. This is one of the partners, or the national partners, that Arnie Duncan's not telling everybody about. The 75,000 student visas went to Middle Eastern students last year. 15,000 of these kids never went to school. We don't know where they're at. Saudis and Qataris are pumping millions into Middle Eastern studies departments. at all the universities. They've set up Middle Eastern Studies departments with millions of dollars, bring in their own professors, bring in students, and they're brainwashing their college kids as well. Northeast Ohio Consortium of Middle Eastern Studies, or otherwise known as NACMS. These are our local schools, Case, BW, John Carroll, Kent, Oberlin, and Cleveland State. And this is taken from their website, this little bottom right here of the NACMS website, and you'll see smack dab in the middle is CARE. This is one of their community partners, an unindicted co-conspirator in the largest terrorism financing trial in the history of the U.S. Okay, local libraries, Islamic books, and huge displays of Islamic-based material are going into over 800 libraries around the country on our tax dollars. We know Cleveland Heights and Lakewood has them up in Greater Cleveland. Big proselytization called, and by the way, that's called Dawa, D-A-W-A, the one Sheikh was talking about, that they can't beat us through the sword, they'll do it through Dawa. That's proselytization. Here's another problem. In our prisons, Muslim chaplains or imams are certified by the Islamic Society of North America. So our federal government certifying them. They're in the prisons and they're converting many prisoners to Islam. In the military, Muslim Brotherhood instructors have been teaching at the U.S. Naval Academy. This is now the second summer in a row. We have a Muslim recruiting station basically at Lackland Air Force Base because every single one of our cadets, Air Force cadets, has to take Islamic sensitivity training down there at Lackland. In Syria, we have our enemies basically fighting our enemies. At least this was last fall when he drew the red line and we're going to go in. And so we have Assad, Iran, and Hezbollah on one side, and the Syrian rebels, the Free Syrian Army, whatever you want to call them, McCain's buddies. They represent maybe 10% of that side. We have Al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood over there. So we run guns and given weapons to the Muslim Brotherhood in Syria. We're basically funding the Muslim Brotherhood. As a result, we see what's happening in the Christians in the Muslim world. They're going bye-bye. Africa, they're being slaughtered. Iraq. In Egypt, we helped install the Muslim Brotherhood when the Arab Spring hit. And it was supposed to be a spontaneous reaction. That was all nonsense. It was a Muslim Brotherhood was waiting the wings to take over. Christians and non-Muslims started being persecuted. And Morsi abandoned the Constitution, tried to implement the strictest of Sharia law, and then Egyptians finally rose up and got the military to throw them out. And now the Egyptians themselves have designated the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. And so have the Saudis. So it's quite devious, I guess. Benghazi, we don't have a lot of time for this, but I can tell you that we were running guns in Libya through Turkey to Syria. That's what was going on there. There's disputes still about what's going to happen if the Select Committee will really get to the truth or if it's going to be compromised. Can Republicans know about this? The person holding up the Select Committee even being finally picked and finally allowed to happen for the longest time was John Boehner. The future must not belong to those who slander the Prophet of Islam. When President Obama went to the UN a couple weeks after this attack, and he started spouting this nonsense about the future not belonging to those who slander the Prophet of Islam, he was referring to that YouTube video that nobody saw. There might have been 1,000 people that saw that video that had absolutely nothing to do with the attack at Benghazi. But there's also a reason they were going to try to spin that. So if you go back and look at if they would have gotten their way, something that was also going on at the same time was called UN 1618, another UN idea for us, okay, for our country. It's a resolution. It's been something that the OIC, I talked about them earlier, all the Muslim countries, have wanted to get for the longest time. They want to curtail our freedom of speech. They want to curtail or stop us from criticizing Islam, Sharia, anything Muslim related. They want to stop what I would be talking to you tonight. I would be breaking the law, and you would all be complicit if they had their way. So they've been after this for quite some time. In the 90s, we basically laughed at them, said, no, well, that's not going to happen. And then we've seen the change slowly through 2000. When Hillary became Secretary of State, she actually started working with them. And it's called the Istanbul process because it started in Istanbul. We've had 3 meetings with them. And she said, well, there's ways we can do it in shaming people, and through political correctness, we can stop this criticism of Islam. So they're pushing at this very hard in conjunction with this plan happening. The Cairo Declaration, so we can see again in the early 90s, They had a meeting in Cairo, the OIC, and they opposed the UN Declaration of Universal Rights or Human Rights back then. And in place, they said they issued something called the Cairo Declaration, which they're still living by, which asserted that the only human rights Muslims recognize are those permitted under Islamic Sharia. So this is basically what we're up against. We got the OIC, political correctness pushing down on us, Al-Qaeda, jihad, whatever, physical jihad, ISIS now, who knows, Hromada al-Fukra training camps, and of course the Muslim Brotherhood. So what do? Well, we expose the plan. First of all, make this common knowledge. And that's probably the biggest thing that we can do at this point. But then we could start to get these state laws. We can't get federal laws passed. In fact, one of the things I asked Brigitte when I first met her in Chicago last May was about the same time Newt Gingrich had come out and said, why don't we just have a federal ban on Sharia? I thought that was an excellent idea. I brought that up and she said the country is not ready for that argument. It would never happen. The Senate wouldn't go for it and President Obama would never sign it, so it would never happen. So that's what we're going for, state laws. This Ohio House Bill 513, now that it's passed in these 8 states, it's so well written it hasn't been challenged one time. It doesn't call out Sharia. It talks about foreign law, any foreign law, and you cannot use that to supersede our constitutional rights. So, of course, Sharia being the biggest problem with it. So, how is ALAC stopped? Because it's been started in several other states, and it hasn't worked. It didn't pass in Texas, of all things. It's through interfaith outreach. We have the imams, which are certified by the Islamic Society of North America, so we know what their goal is. They are using uninformed pastors, priests, and rabbis to stop ALAC. With all the bridge building that's going on, what they do is they tell these rabbis or pastors, priests, they say, look, we're trying to build bridges here. If your congregation supports this law, or if you support this law as the leader of a congregation, you're going to wreck all those bridge building opportunities that we've had. And what quite frankly should happen is that the priest, rabbi, or pastor should turn around and say, look, if you wanted to really get people on your side, you would say you're here for the Constitution, you don't have a problem with this law, and you're ready to assimilate. But of course they won't do that. And the priests, rabbis, and pastors won't do that unless they know about this whole plan of the brotherhoods. So the public needs to be educated, and we need to educate our clergy. So I just added this to my presentation. I was hoping Chris would be here, Chris Long from the Ohio Christian Alliance. But now that you've seen this, Tom, I could use your help. We need the states where this law has passed. It's because their group in the state, similar to the Ohio Christian Alliance, so whether it be the Florida Christian Alliance, whatever, they're the ones that got behind it and got to all the clergy and the people that belong to their organization and explained the law and why it's necessary and why it's needed. So that's what we're hoping for. Okay, this is the guy, Siddiqui, talked about our job is to change the Constitution. So when you see the Islamic Society of North America, remember that's what they're all about. Frank Gaffney was in Brecksville. So a few of you I recognize were there back on July 28th. He was a former Undersecretary of Defense with Ronald Reagan. He's one of the leading experts on this as well. So we got Emerson from the Investigative Project on Terrorism, Brigitte, Frank Gaffney, Claire Lopez. Claire, Frank, and Brigitte all sit on the Benghazi Accountability Coalition, and that was put together to keep the Select Committee on Benghazi honest. So we'll see, we'll get information from him on how well that's going. By the way, when you see me at the end of the night at our table, I have a business card that has both Act for America websites on it, as well as Gaffney's site, Emerson's site, and a few of the other key sites of the expert trainers in this country who know everything what's going on. When Frank was in Brecksville, he told us about federal legislation that just got introduced like a couple days before that, right before Congress broke for the summer. Michelle Bachmann was one of the first people on this. Her and Louis Gohmert in 2012 sent out letters to the Inspector Generals of all the major departments, Justice, FBI, DHS, asking for an investigation of the Muslim Brotherhood in our government. Because she mentioned Umar Abedin, Anthony Weiner's wife, who is Hillary's aide, as part of this, and she is tied to this. Her parents were involved with the Muslim Brotherhood from way back. Boehner and McCain read her the Riot Act. Okay, they stopped it. Those were the two guys, Republicans. This bill that she's come out now, H.R. 5194, and she's got about 10 co-sponsors so far. We gave a copy of it to Dave Joyce the other night up in Chesterland, and we'll be seeing all of our reps in D.C. in a couple weeks, giving it to them. And this is to designate the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist designation. That's what it's called, Muslim Brotherhood Terrorist Designation Act. So we want to get them designated as a terrorist group, which would force that trial, force those documents to be released, force the trial to happen, and hopefully shut down these organizations from being allowed to flourish. You got a handout tonight about something called Extortion 17. We have the Navy SEALs that took out bin Laden. Back in August of 2011, they went on a mission called Extortion 17 in Anbar province, I believe, Afghanistan, and they got taken down. And there's a lot of problems with that mission. The wrong helicopter was used. No drones were used as advanced scouts. Afghans were switched at the last second. And this is how bad it was with these Afghans or Afghanis, whatever you want to call them. Our government notified the original 6 or 7 Afghans that were on that chopper and notified their parents that the kids died, or their sons died. So that got so bad they had to go back and re-notify the parents and say, no, we're sorry, we're mistaken. Your parents, or your boys are alive because these 7 got switched out at the last second. So something very mysterious there, or something's wrong there. The black box is still missing. Now, the black boxes always show up. So supposedly got washed away by a flood. Parents aren't buying it. Neither are a lot of high-ranking ex-military. Guys you'll see on Fox, McInerney, Valley, Ace Lyons, who was a commander of the Pacific Fleet, World War II. The bodies were cremated without the parents' permission. So we lose 30 Navy SEALs, and the bodies are cremated. An imam gave the final prayers, and Jesus was not allowed to be mentioned. So you can imagine the parents are fit to be tied. They have been after trying to get congressional hearings. They got one through Jason Chaffetz, and it went nowhere. They've been on Fox, on all the major programs, Huckabee, Fox and Friends in the morning, telling their story. Finally, they hooked up with Act for America, and they've been traveling the country. The dad wrote a book. It's called Betrayed. The mom is Karen Vaughn. The dad's Billy Vaughn. And Karen is part of the Freedom Tour that traveled around with concerned vets. There was an event back in May up in Westlake that the concerned vets put on. And Pete Hegseth was there, and some other vets, war heroes, and she was there. But she didn't get to tell about this. She just talked about the human side of Aaron, what a great kid he was. So we're going to host them in October, Saturday, October 18th. That's why you have the handout. It's going to be at Word of Grace Church up in Chesterland on Mayfield Road right by 306. So you are all invited. This is the first notice. Tom will definitely have more information as we get closer, and I'll probably send him a couple links about what actually happened with the mission. But we're trying to support them, and we're going to have them in on a Saturday afternoon so they could really tell the whole story, because it needs to get out. That's Billy. That's the son Aaron. That's the book Betrayed. Okay, so what can you do now that you know all this? Push your federal legislators on H.R. 5194, the Muslim Brotherhood Terrorist Designation Act, put out by Michelle Bachmann. Push your state legislators on ALAC, Ohio House Bill 513. How do you do this? Either sign up for Act for America's emails, Brigitte, they send out one a day. Talk about different aspects of the whole Islamic problem, Muslim problem, and their website is actforamerica.org. It's on my business card. It's on the handout that you have. You can also email me at actcleveland@gmail.com, and it has to be included on my mailing list. What's going to happen is Matt Lynch will tell me when it's time to push on ALAC. Okay, it's sitting in the Judiciary Committee right now. He tells me, okay, have all your people call or email and bother Chairman Butler of the Judiciary Committee or Speaker Batchelder. Get it out to the floor for a vote. Once it gets to the floor for a vote, it has a very good chance to pass. First of all, that's just the track record around the country. That's what's happening. Republican legislators are passing it. Secondly, this was passed unanimously in less than a minute by the Republican National Committee as part of their platform in 2012. So when we have the RNC come in here in 2016, they'll probably pass it again. So it wouldn't make any much sense for Governor Kasich not to sign this bill, whether it be later this year or during 2015, prior to the RNC coming here in 2016. So this should not be an establishment versus Tea Party issue. And quite frankly, it shouldn't be a Republican or Democrat issue. It's an American issue. It's about protecting our Constitution, protecting our country. Thank you very much. Thank you.